Welcome to the Deconstructionist Deep Dive.
The podcast that doesn't just accept the story,
We break it
we examine the pieces.
and expose the machinery inside.
Let's dive in.
What if everything about finding meaning through sacrifice isn't just a psychological truth, but is designed to lock you into a specific religious framework?
Yeah.
So that opening question, that's basically our mission statement for this deep dive. We're taking apart a really big intellectual structure here, one that's, well, it's grabbed the attention of millions.
It really has.
And it pushes this idea, this philosophy, that the only path out of, suffering and meaninglessness is consciously adopting these specific archetypal stories about sacrifice.
Right. And look, our mission today isn't just to trash it. We're not dismissing the psychological insights here because, honestly, some of them are quite brilliant.
Yeah, the observations about anxiety, the need for structure, they definitely resonate.
Absolutely. But our goal, it's more like taking a scalpel to the logical architecture. How does it get from those sharp observations to what feels like a pretty dogmatic prescription? That's what we're digging into.
Okay, so we have to start right at the bottom, the foundation, what we're calling the structural premise of perception.
Yeah, this is key. The framework argues that how we perceive things, how we create meaning, it's not passive. We're not just like soaking up reality as it is.
We're actively building it, structuring it.
Exactly. It's a really critical philosophical starting point. The world, before we get involved, it's presented as this infinite, overwhelming chaos of potential.
They even call it the abyss.
Right, the abyss. And if you try to take it all in at once, you're just paralyzed. It's too much. Psychologically, it's, well, intolerable.
So what makes this chaos manageable then?
That's where the aim filter comes in. Our aims, our goals, our purpose. They act like a cognitive filter.
How so?
Well, think about it. If my aim is, say, hitting a deadline at work, my brain automatically starts filtering out all the other noise, right? And it highlights only what's relevant to that goal. The tools I need, the obstacles in my way, the steps I have to take.
So the aim itself shapes what you even see.
Precisely. That's the implication, and it's profound. The very structure of reality, for you as an individual, is defined by what you're aiming at. It simplifies the chaos, turns this infinite potential into something limited, something you can actually navigate.
It's a pretty compelling way to think about how our brains handle, well, everything.
It is. But the stakes here, they're framed as existential. If aim gives us structure, what happens if you don't have one? If you lack that unifying upward-aiming story?
Well, according to the framework, it's catastrophe, right?
That's the central claim. It's not just, feeling a bit lost or bored. It's full-on existential catastrophe. Anxiety, resentment, collapsing into meaninglessness.
They're basically lost in that chaos you're trying to ignore.
And they immediately use this. They leverage that pain point. And honestly, with a lot of persuasive force.
They bring in data, don't they? Like that UK study.
Yeah, the one claiming something like 85% of people feel their life is meaningless. Now, whether that number is perfectly accurate or more illustrative,
it hits hard.
It does. It's not just a footnote. It's the emotional hook. It basically says to the listener, see, your pain is real. It's systemic. It's because you lack the right orientation.
And that perfectly sets up their framework as the answer. The necessary antidote.
Exactly. You validate the suffering first. That statistic speaks directly to that feeling, that modern spiritual void lots of people feel.
Okay. And right here, this is where we pinpoint the central logical issue we're deconstructing today, what we're calling the ultimate conclusion, or maybe the hidden key.
Right. Because the framework makes this very distinct leap. It may be an unsupported one.
It goes from descriptive claim A, humans suffer from chaos, they need unifying aims. Which sounds reasonable enough.
Yes, psychologically plausible.
Straight to prescriptive claim B. Therefore, the only solution is adopting and living out this specific archetypal story, the one about proper sacrifice, rooted specifically in the Judeo-Christian tradition.
And that's the moment. That's where the philosophical lens seems to, morph into a dogmatic one.
Because you can accept the first part, right, that humans need structure, meaning.
Totally. We can accept the psychology, but the jump to therefore, it must be this specific ancient map. Why? Why not Stoicism? Or, Buddhism? Or even a secular humanist approach?
Well, I guess the counter-argument, from their perspective, is if chaos is the ultimate bad and meaning is the ultimate good, doesn't that automatically give ultimate authority to the system that claims it codified the rules for getting order out of chaos?
So the leap isn't unsupported in their view because that specific narrative is defined as the, quote, deepest map.
Right. That seems to be the implication.
Okay, we'll definitely need to challenge that whole deepest map idea later on. But for now, we just need to acknowledge that's how it's presented, almost as self-evident.
Yeah. That transition from psychological usefulness to moral necessity. That's the fault line we're tracing.
So let's get into the structure itself. We need to understand the 4 main pillars they use to hold up this massive claim.
All right, let's dig into these 4 load-bearing pillars. Pillar 1, the necessity of aim. We touched on this, but let's get into the specific definitions they use.
Okay. So we established aim specifies perception, right?
Yeah.
Turns the chaos into a habitable, ordered world. But the mechanism of the aim, they define it in like really granular detail.
It's not just about seeing things differently.
It's more than that. Aim doesn't just create broad categories. It structures your reality into these functional groups, all relevant to your goal.
Okay, what are those groups?
They basically say reality gets sorted into 3 bins. First, positive facilitators. These are the tools, the allies, the things that help you move forward.
Right.
Second, negative impediments. The obstacles, the challenges, the things blocking your path.
Makes sense.
And third, this is interesting, agents of transformation. These are the really tough challenges, the ones that, if you actually manage to navigate them successfully, force you to grow, to mature.
And if you don't have an aim,
then none of these categories exist for you. You're just lost in that undifferentiated potential, that chaos. It's a really powerful cognitive model, actually.
and they connect this directly to theology, don't they? Giving it a contemporary spin.
They do. It's clever.
Yeah.
They draw the strong parallel to the concept of sin.
But not sin in the way most people think about it today, like just breaking a rule and feeling guilty.
Exactly. They strip that away and go back to the original Greek term, hamartia,
Which means?
missing the target, like in archery, missing the mark.
Ah, okay. So sin becomes less about being bad and more about being off target, a failure of orientation.
Precisely. If your aim defines the target, then sin is just being disorganized, not aligning your actions towards that future good you're supposed to be aiming at. It's a failure of, like, cognitive and moral positioning.
That redefinition makes it instantly,
Yeah.
well, useful, doesn't it?
Right.
Especially for a secular audience trying to get their life in order.
Totally. It's a neat trick, repositioning a moral failing as basically a cognitive alignment problem.
Which flows directly into Pillar 2, the centrality of sacrifice. This seems to be the core equation, turning that aim into action.
Yeah, this is central. And sacrifice here is defined really rigorously, very pragmatically. It's the voluntary giving up of, say, present, maybe selfish whims or desires for a future good.
A future good for yourself or your family or the community.
Right. It's the engine of delayed gratification, essentially.
And they make this really sticky with these, like, identity statements, equations almost.
They present it clearly. Maturation equals the sacrifice of impulsivity.
Okay.
Community equals the sacrifice of narrow self-interest.
Right.
And crucially, work equals the sacrifice of the present for the future.
Those are punchy. They make the abstract feel concrete.
And they immediately ground it in biology and psychology. They contrast, say, the impulsive, fractionated state of a toddler, screaming for what they want now, with the integrated, future-looking brain development needed for adult life.
Cortical maturation.
Exactly. So the argument becomes, delaying gratification isn't just some ethical choice you make. It's literally how you build a functional, mature brain. It's biological necessity.
So delaying gratification, arguably one of the most supported ideas in behavioral science, gets transformed into this universal moral and biological law. That's the underpinning.
Yeah. Sacrifice isn't necessary just because some god said so in an old book. It's necessary because your own nervous system demands it if you want to exist successfully.
Okay, that's a powerful claim. Now, Pillar 3. This is where it feels like the philosophy gets, well, mythopoetic.
Yeah.
The biblical codex as hyper-reality.
Right. This is the argument that tries to elevate these specific stories beyond just literature or, interesting old myths.
The claim is that myths aren't just untrue stories.
It's stronger than that. They argue myth and fiction aren't the opposite of fact. Instead, they're hyper-real.
Hyper-real.
Meaning they're like distilled abstractions. Ancient wisdom filtered over millennia that reveals the core structures of how humans exist more accurately than just, say, observing day-to-day life.
Because they've survived. They're the fittest narratives.
That's the idea, that they're supposedly the deepest maps we have because they've won the evolutionary selection process of storytelling over thousands of years.
And to show how deep these maps are, they dive into the archetypes. Adam and Eve are key here.
Absolutely. They get analyzed in meticulous detail. Adam is framed as the masculine principle, the naming and subduing force.
Ordering chaos, building structure, establishing hierarchy, specifically patriarchal hierarchy in their reading. He builds the garden, the ordered space.
And Eve, she's the feminine principle, described as a martial partner in challenging play, which is an interesting phrase.
Right.
But also, she's the voice of the marginalized, the vulnerable. She represents the edge, the boundary between the known order and the unknown chaos. She challenges the existing structure, keeps it from getting too rigid or tyrannical.
So these aren't meant to be read as, like, literal historical people from 6,000 years ago.
No, not primarily. They're presented as eternal psychological or even metaphysical forces wrestling with existence itself.
Okay. But the archetype that seems most central to this whole sacrifice framework is Cain and Abel.
Right, definitely. That story is positioned as the pattern, the template for doing aim and sacrifice correctly and incorrectly.
Abel represents the upward aim. He offers the best, he has the best of his flock, his full willing effort, honoring the future.
Right, proper sacrifice.
And Cain offers the second best. He holds back, is resentful.
Yeah, the sacrifice is grudging, incomplete, and this leads directly to bitterness, envy, and then ultimately the murder of the ideal itself, killing Abel.
And they frame this not just as a story, but as the foundational tragedy of human moral failure.
Exactly. And what makes it so rhetorically effective is how deeply relatable Cain's resentment feels.
Yeah, that hits home.
Yeah.
That feeling of giving a half-hearted effort, then feeling bitter about someone else's success.
Success that came from genuine effort, yeah. And maybe even wanting to tear down that success, destroy the evidence of your own moral slackness. It's uncomfortable because we recognize it.
And the framework presents this as this cosmic, timeless warning baked into our oldest stories.
That level of detail on the archetypes is crucial. It grounds these huge, abstract ideas in very real human emotions and failings.
Okay, so that brings us to the final pillar. Pillar 4. God is the spirit of ultimate aim. This sounds like it moves beyond a traditional, like, personified God.
It does mostly. God here is defined less as a specific being and more as the spirit that broods upon the primeval waters of chaos. That's pulling from Genesis, the Hebrew tohu vabohu.
The formless void.
Right. So God is the principle that extracts habitable order, consciousness out of that chaos. It's the ordering principle itself.
And it's the source of,
What?
like, inspiration.
Sort of.
Excellent.
It's characterized as the source of all those transformational calls we feel, the continuous pull towards development, maturity, responsibility. It is the direction of upward aim.
Okay, so what's the human role in relation to this spirit?
Hugely significant, according to the framework. We are made in the image of this spirit. Our consciousness is like the local version, the instantiation of this universal ordering principle.
So our job is to do the same thing, to order chaos.
Essentially, yes. To grapple with possibility, with potential, and transform it into ethical actuality. We become partners in the ongoing creation of order. Co-creators almost.
Wow, okay. So when you put all 4 pillars together, aim is the filter, sacrifice is the method, the Bible is the map, and this God as the ultimate direction.
Then the prescription seems to just fall out of it. It becomes self-evident within the system. To live successfully, to find meaning, you must live out this specific archetypal story. There's no other way presented. Okay, so we've mapped out the structure, but before we really start taking the hammer to the logic, we have to step back and appreciate why this whole thing is so compelling. Because it really is.
Yeah, you can't deny its appeal.
Yeah.
It's a masterclass in rhetoric, isn't it? It seems almost deliberately engineered to hit on these really deep-seated anxieties and pain points.
Absolutely. And it starts with how the authority is framed. This isn't just some guy yelling on a street corner.
No, it's delivered globally. Big lecture halls, university settings initially.
Yeah.
It frames the speaker as this extension of the professor role.
Right. An intellectual giant, bringing this profound, maybe neglected wisdom out of the ivory tower and, to the masses.
That framing immediately gives it a certain weight. It bypasses the usual filters people might have for, say, religious or ideological claims.
Exactly. It's presented not as faith, but as necessary truth, derived from seemingly objective psychological and historical analysis. Delivered by this authoritative figure. It's packaged like intellectual medicine.
Yeah, not just belief. And then there's the way it just surgically targets emotional pain points. It's not abstract existential angst they talk about.
No, they use the most visceral stuff imaginable. We already talked about the pain of meaninglessness. That's kind of the gateway drug for the whole argument. But they go deeper. They bring up the struggle of parenting a sick child.
Oof, yeah.
That's universal. It involves this profound, often involuntary sacrifice. And by weaving that specific agonizing example right into the argument,
It connects the abstract idea sacrifice is necessary to something immediately, undeniably human and painful.
right, it kind of short-circuits your critical thinking because it appeals directly to that shared vulnerability. Who's going to argue against the pain of a sick child?
Nobody. And that universalizing of resentment using Cain and Abel, that's maybe the strongest hook of all.
I think so too. Because everyone understands that bitter feeling, that destructive envy.
Yeah.
And by attaching that common everyday feeling to this huge biblical violation, they give you an instant tool, a way to diagnose your own moral failures right now.
It makes the ancient story feel incredibly relevant to your own inner life.
The effectiveness is how fast they translate the high mythology into recognizable internal conflict. But the real, maybe genius part is grounding all this abstract stuff with really accessible modern examples.
Right, we're talking about Tohu Vabohu and Primeval Chaos, but then suddenly we're discussing James Bond films. How does that work rhetorically?
Well, Bond, or figures like him, they become examples of ordering chaos on the fly, right? He has the ultimate aim filter, the mission.
Okay.
Everything he encounters a random object, a person instantly becomes either a tool, positive facilitator, or an obstacle, negative impediment. He sacrifices comfort, safety, everything for the mission.
So he becomes this modern secular stand-in for the disciplined, sacrificing individual.
Exactly. It tells the listener, see, this deep principle, you recognize it every time you watch an action hero, makes it feel less ancient and weird.
And the examples of failure are just as important, like using high school shooters.
Yeah, that's a rough one, but rhetorically powerful. They're presented as the ultimate failure of aim. Total dissolution into chaos, enacting Cain's pathological resentment in the most destructive way possible, hating existence itself because they fail to offer their best.
And the corporate lawyer example, that's used differently again.
Right, often used to represent order, but maybe at the cost of the spirit or true meaning. They establish rules, hierarchy, that's the Adam principle of ordering chaos.
But maybe lack the upward aim, the true sacrifice, the vulnerability, and the Eve principle maybe.
That's often the implication. It shows that just having order isn't enough. Order without that conscious moral striving can become just stagnant or even tyrannical.
So all these examples, they're like necessary decorations. They make the big mythological ideas feel relatable, sticky.
Totally. If you can suddenly use the Adam and Eve story to understand why your office dynamic feels off, the whole framework starts to feel incredibly powerful, useful, and therefore true.
Yeah, it creates this really compelling illusion of explaining, well, almost everything. A grand unified theory of meaning.
Right.
Okay, the rhetoric is undeniably powerful. The hooks are sharp. The structure is all laid out. Now it's time for the scalpel. Let's dissect the internal logic, the philosophical flaws. Where do we start pulling this apart?
We go straight for the jugular, logically speaking. The single biggest load-bearing crack in the entire building. The eyes ought problem.
David Hume. The classic philosophical critique.
Exactly. And it's devastating for any philosophy that tries to derive what we should do directly from what is, morality from observation.
So the flaw is that unsupported leap we talked about earlier, from descriptive claims to prescriptive ones.
Precisely. We can acknowledge the descriptive claims often hold water. Humans do seem to need structure. Sacrifice is psychologically real and often necessary for growth. That's the eyes. But the argument jumps straight from that is to therefore, you ought to adopt this specific Judeo-Christian structure as the universal moral way to live. That's the ought.
And the connection isn't logical.
There's no logical deduction there. The bridge between what is psychological reality and what ought to be a moral command is built on things like appeals to tradition, emotional resonance, how coherent it feels, but it's not a logical step.
But hang on, what about the argument that the sacrifice pattern is found everywhere? across nearly all human cultures, right? From, I don't know, ancient rituals to monks. Doesn't that universality give it a kind of ought status? Doesn't it suggest it's metaphysically necessary?
That's the common defense, yeah. But it's actually a fallacy. Universality proves utility. It proves psychological prevalence. It might show that the human brain is wired to think this way or that this pattern is really useful for societies.
But not that it's the ultimate truth.
Exactly. We can observe that every human needs oxygen. That's a descriptive fact, universally true. But that doesn't logically derive any specific moral rules about how we must live our lives beyond, well, making sure we can breathe.
So the framework is kind of smuggling in a very specific dogmatic ought hidden inside a generally accepted is.
That's exactly how it functions. And the really critical implication for you, the listener, is that you are logically free to accept the insights. Yes, aim is important. Yes, sacrifice matters, while completely rejecting the conclusion that you must follow this specific biblical roadmap.
The mechanism might be true, but the map itself is optional.
Precisely. Okay, second major logical flaw, the reification of archetypes.
Reification, treating an abstract idea as if it's a concrete thing.
You got it. It's confusing the map for the territory, but in a really fundamental way.
Can you give us a quick analogy for reification? Make it super clear.
Sure. Think about how we talk about the market in finance. The market is nervous today. The market likes this policy. We talk about it like it's a single entity, a person with feelings and intentions.
When really it's just millions of individual traders making billions of separate decisions.
Exactly. The framework does the exact same thing with its psychological concepts.
It takes Adam, Eve, maybe even concepts like the Luciferian spirit, which are useful ways to conceptualize human drives and motivations,
And treats them as if they are objective, external, foundational realities. The discussion slides seamlessly from "this is a useful way to think about responsibility" to "this is an eternal metaphysical pattern that literally governs the cosmos."
And that's the material deficiency you mentioned.
That's it, because it shifts the whole argument. You go from empirical, debatable psychology into the realm of unverifiable metaphysical speculation, demanding faith where before you were offering analysis.
It's like taking Carl Jung's ideas. He saw archetypes as real psychological patterns in our collective unconscious, but then twisting them into a rigid religious dogma, saying these aren't just patterns in our minds, they are literal blueprints of reality.
That's a good way to put it. Which leads us nicely to the third flaw, and this one can be really intellectually frustrating: the circular proof structure.
The self-sealing argument, where the logic just loops back on itself.
Exactly. It creates this closed system that protects itself from any external critique or falsification.
Okay, break down how the circle works here.
It works beautifully in a way. Step 1. The validity and the profound depth of these specific biblical stories are proven by how well they seem to explain human psychology, our suffering, our successes, our need for meaning. They feel true because they map onto reality so well.
Okay, seems reasonable so far.
But then, step 2. Where did that deep psychological insight come from in the first place? Well, it was discovered by analyzing the world, human suffering, resentment, the need for structure through the lens of those exact same biblical stories.
So the stories prove the insights, and the insights were found using the stories.
It's a perfect echo chamber. The map validates the territory it describes, and the territory, when viewed through the map, confirms the map's accuracy. If you start by defining order as alignment with this narrative and chaos as deviation from it,
then everything you see, good or bad, will just reinforce your starting definition.
Exactly. Which makes the whole argument incredibly resistant to being proven wrong. Falsification becomes almost impossible.
Because if you don't follow the narrative, and you end up miserable like Cain's bitterness.
Well, the narrative itself defines that misery as the inevitable consequence of violating the archetype. You can't step outside the system to judge its truth because the system defines all the terms of judgment, including failure.
Wow. That feeling of intellectual satisfaction, like you found the one map that explains everything. It's powerful, but it rests on a foundation that's, well, structurally unsound.
Compromised, yeah.
Descartes.
Logically circular. Okay. So our deconstruction has shown, hopefully, that while this framework offers some really powerful tools, its claim to exclusivity rests on some pretty shaky logical ground. It forces a specific dogma.
Right. So the next logical step for us, and for you listening, is to figure out a way forward. How do we keep the useful bits, the importance of aim, the value of sacrifice, but ditch the restrictive hidden key, that specific dogmatic map?
We need to look at alternative maps. other ways of finding meaning and structure.
Let's start with Jungian psychology again. It seems like the closest cousin, right? Both use archetypes, ancient stories.
They do share that foundational idea. Yeah. Deep stories hold structural truths. They both talk about Adam, Eve, these kinds of figures as important psychological symbols.
But the difference is in how they're used.
Crucially, Jung was fundamentally descriptive. He documented these universal patterns he observed in myths, dreams across cultures. He said, look, these patterns exist in the psyche. The framework we're analyzing takes that descriptive base and builds a highly prescriptive moral building on top of it. It turns Jung's fascinating psychological hypothesis into a strict moral requirement. Jung allows for many useful myths. This framework insists on the one, singular, deepest myth.
Got it. What about pragmatism? William James and that whole school of thought.
Pragmatism offers a completely different angle. It basically sidesteps the entire debate about, is this metaphysically true? For a pragmatist like James, the truth of an idea is found in its practical consequences, its cash value in the real world.
So narratives are just tools.
Exactly. Tools. We don't ask, is the Adam and Eve story literally factually true? We ask, does adopting the principles of responsibility and order maybe derived from this story actually make my life work better? Does it produce good results?
The truth is measured by its usefulness.
By its functional outcome in guiding successful action, not by its claim to divine origin or being an eternal archetype. And that approach allows for total pluralism. Use whatever map works best for you.
Okay. And the third alternative, existentialism. Sartre, for example.
Right. Existentialism actually agrees with the framework on the huge importance of responsibility and the agony of choice. But it locates the source of meaning somewhere completely different.
Where?
In radical individual choice. Pure freedom. Sartre's famous line, existence precedes essence.
Meaning you're not born with a purpose, like fulfilling the Adam archetype.
Exactly. You're just thrown into the world condemned to be free, as he put it, and you have to create your own essence, your own meaning, through your choices.
So sacrifice and aim aren't about aligning with some pre-existing cosmic order.
No, they are the products of your terrifying freedom. You choose your aim, you choose your sacrifices. The weight of creating meaning is entirely on you, not on finding the right ancient map.
This feels heavier in a way. Less comforting than being given the map.
Definitely. It puts the responsibility squarely on the individual's shoulders.
Okay, so these alternatives clearly show that the core insights aiming high, the psychology of sacrifice, can definitely be separated from the specific religious dogma.
Which allows us to propose some, let's call them logical renovations to the original framework. Ways to keep the utility.
Renovation number one.
Renovation one, embrace the plurality of meaning. We need to replace that monolithic foundation, the idea that Judeo-Christian narratives are the true maps, with something more robust, more universal, grounded just in psychology.
So what's the new statement?
How about this? The human mind requires a coherent, future-oriented, pro-social aim to thrive.
Simple. It keeps the need for aim, for responsibility, for looking ahead.
But it completely decouples it from any specific tradition, makes it universally applicable, maximizes the psychological insight without the dogma.
Okay, makes sense. Renovation two.
Renovation two. Reframe from prescription to toolbox. We need to relabel that pillar 3, the biblical codex, as ultimate truth.
Change it to what?
How about mythology as a cognitive and ethical toolbox? So it respects the wisdom in the stories.
Absolutely. Acknowledges they are profound tools for self-reflection, for recognizing patterns in human behavior, common roads to failure, common paths to success.
But you don't need to believe they are literal or metaphysically ultimate to use them.
Exactly. You can analyze Cain's resentment in your own life or see it in a coworker without having to believe Cain literally killed Abel thousands of years ago. The pattern is useful, regardless of metaphysical assent.
Okay. These renovations lead to a different overall approach then.
Yeah, a new architectural approach. We called it the pragmatic spire, instead of aiming for a summit of divine revelation or hyper-reality.
The final conclusion is about functional utility, what works.
Right. So the new summit statement, the ultimate takeaway, should sound something like this.
Okay, let's hear it. Adopt the narratives and practices, whether they come from the Bible, Stoicism, Buddhism, secular humanism, wherever that best enable you to sacrifice impulsivity for future good, build strong communities, and find meaning in your work. And crucially, test them. Test them by their functional outcomes in your life, not by their claims to divine origin or ancient authority.
So the truth test shifts from, is this the ancient, revealed truth, to, does this actually work to improve my life and the lives of those around me?
Precisely. It puts the power and the responsibility for validation back onto lived experience. The best system is the one that demonstrably, functionally minimizes the chaos and maximizes the order and meaning in your life, whatever its source code happens to be.
All right, we've taken the structure apart, looked at the rhetoric, considered alternatives, proposed renovations. So what's the final integrated judgment on this incredibly influential framework?
Well, first, we absolutely have to acknowledge its descriptive power. It's undeniable.
Yeah, as a piece of psychological insight into how humans structure their lives through narrative, it's kind of a masterwork.
Yeah, it really is. The articulation of why we need aim, how sacrifice functions in maturation and building community, the mechanics of resentment and avoiding chaos, it's profound stuff. Its diagnosis of human failure is often painfully sharp and accurate.
But there's always a but in deconstruction.
There is. The prescriptive failure is almost the unavoidable flip side of its rigid architecture. The whole system is ultimately compromised.
By what specifically? Recap the main issues.
By its dogmatic core, insisting on one specific narrative. By its reliance on metaphysical claims that are, frankly, unverifiable, and by that logical circularity which traps the listener inside a closed intellectual loop that can't easily be checked against external reality.
So the value isn't in the claim that it's the only truth.
No. The value lies in the utility of the rules for living it often extracts. Take responsibility, aim high, delay gratification, confront chaos honestly. These are wisdom principles you find echoed across almost every successful human culture and philosophy.
The flaw is claiming those principles are the exclusive property of this one specific mythological tradition.
Exactly. So the ultimate takeaway for you listening to this deep dive should be this. The framework's real value isn't in its claim to ultimate singular truth. It's in its power as a heuristic tool, a mental shortcut, a way of thinking for understanding and navigating the really difficult challenges of just being human.
A powerful tool, but not the only tool in the box.
Precisely. And the whole point of this deconstruction was to help preserve that utility, to keep the useful tools like aim and sacrifice while loosening or even removing the dogmatic constraints.
You can use the map's insights without feeling locked into the architect's single intended destination.
You're free to use the insights. You're free to choose your own spire, your own ultimate aim based on what demonstrably works for you.
And that's a deep dive for this week.
Remember, the most dangerous illusion is the one you don't know you're in.
But now you know. So here's our question for you. Knowing what you know now about how narratives shape reality, what's one story you've been telling yourself about work, relationships, or purpose that you need to stop telling starting today?
Let us know in the comments. Question the narrative, deconstruct the dogma, see the system.
We'll see you next time. Stay skeptical. Thank you for joining us.